At Atlanta International Airport's departure lounge, tension started to brew amid the usual bustle of a busy day. People moved back and forth, dragging suitcases, checking their phones, while announcements about flights echoed over the speakers. In a corner of the priority boarding area, a black girl with curly hair, about 15 years old, sat with her shoulders tense, tightly gripping her boarding pass. Her name was Amara Williams, and this day was supposed to be special. Amara was wearing an oversized gray hoodie, slightly worn white sneakers, and a black backpack that seemed far too heavy for her size. She had boarded a connecting flight alone in New York and was now waiting to take the final leg to Los Angeles, where she would meet her father. Despite being young, she was used to traveling alone, but something about this morning felt different. The boarding pass in her hand clearly indicated first class, something that had never happened before. Her father, usually practical and thrifty, never splurged on expensive tickets. He always said the money could be used for something more meaningful. Amara had never questioned it. So, when his assistant handed her this ticket, she was confused, but said nothing. If she was going to fly in the front of the plane, so be it. Maybe it was an early birthday present. The priority boarding call began, and Amara hesitated before standing up and slinging the backpack over her shoulder. She double-checked the seat number printed on the ticket. 2A. Definitely first class. She headed toward the exclusive line, where passengers in suits and ties, elegant dresses and expensive bags, seemed to glance at her sideways. Amara tried to ignore the discomfort. Even though she wasn't accustomed to this level of luxury, she knew she had the right to be there. After all, the ticket was in her hand. When she reached the counter where a stern-faced agent was checking tickets, things started to unravel. The woman, a blonde with blue eyes named Karen Mitchell, gave Amara a head-to-toe look, examining every detail of her clothing and posture before taking the ticket from her hand. "This isn't the boarding line for economy class," Karen said abruptly, holding the ticket as if it were an obvious mistake. "You're in the wrong line." "I know," Amara said, trying to keep her voice steady. "My seat is 2A. Karen raised an eyebrow and pursed her lips, as if processing the information with skepticism. Then she looked at the ticket again and back at Amara. The silence between them began to draw curious stares. "Are you sure this is your ticket?" Karen asked, a clear note of disbelief in her voice. "Because, usually first class is reserved for frequent flyers or people who paid a lot of money for it." "It is mine," Amara insisted, feeling heat rise to her face. "My dad gave it to me." "I see." Karen let out a short, humorless laugh, but continued to look at Amara as if something was clearly off. "I'll need to check this in the system. Please wait here." Without giving her a chance to argue, Karen turned around and began typing something into her computer. Amara felt her legs weaken, but stood her ground. People in line behind her began murmuring. Some whispered while others visibly showed their irritation at the delay. After what felt like an eternity, Karen returned with the same doubtful expression. "It doesn't show here that this ticket was purchased under a financial guardian's name, so you might have received it by mistake. We'll need to move you to economy class. It's just back in the main cabin." Amara's eyes widened as a lump formed in her throat. "No, you can't do that. My dad gave me this ticket and this is where I'm supposed to sit." Karen crossed her arms. "Look, sweetheart, I'm just trying to avoid any problems here. Sometimes teenagers traveling alone end up with the wrong tickets, It's nothing personal, but it doesn't make sense for you to be in first class." "Nothing personal?" Amara repeated, outraged. "This is on my ticket. If there's a problem, it's not mine." Her voice started to tremble, but she had no intention of crying. She knew exactly what this was about. It wasn't about the ticket or a system error. It was about the fact that she, a black girl in simple clothes, didn't fit the image Karen expected to see in a first-class seat. Amara knew how these things worked because she'd seen her mother go through something similar at a restaurant years ago. More voices started chiming in from the line. A man behind Amara, visibly impatient, complained, "Can we speed this up? Some of us have important commitments." Another passenger, younger in appearance, muttered under his breath, "Just let the girl through. If it's on her ticket, it's on her ticket." But Karen remained resolute. She picked up a communication radio and began calling another employee. Moments later, a tall man in a suit appeared. His badge read, "Thomas Evans, Supervisor." Karen explained the situation to him, clearly biased, emphasizing that Amara was insisting on sitting where she shouldn't. The supervisor, however, didn't seem to share her stance. He calmly reviewed the ticket, looked at Amara and asked, "Can you confirm your father's name, miss?" Still visibly tense, Amara replied, "Michael Williams." The supervisor frowned and typed something into the tablet he was carrying. When the results appeared on the screen, he raised his eyes to Amara and then cast a sharp look at Karen. There was a spark of recognition in his face, as though he had just pieced everything together. "Karen, this ticket is valid, and Miss Williams is seated correctly. There's no need for further checks." Karen looked visibly flustered, but before she could argue, the supervisor turned to Amara with a forced smile, attempting to smooth things over. "I apologize for the inconvenience, Miss Williams. Please go ahead and board." But the damage was already done. Amara gave Karen a firm look, as if to engrave the moment in her memory. Then she moved toward the aircraft, her heart pounding. When she finally took her seat in first class, the ordeal seemed far from over. Some passengers still stared at her, and she knew the curious looks and whispers weren't just about what had happened at the gate. They were trying to figure out why she was there. Who was she? Why did she seem so out of place in that environment? The boarding process continued, but before the plane took off, Amara received a message on her phone. It was from her father. "The team called me. Are you okay? We'll talk when you land. That shouldn't have happened." The lump in Amara's throat returned, but this time it felt different. She didn't know what to expect when she arrived in Los Angeles, but somehow she sensed that her life was about to change forever. The airplane door closed, and the sound of the engines began to grow louder as the plane prepared for takeoff. Amara tried to focus on her surroundings, but her mind was still stuck on what had happened at the boarding gate. Even seated in the comfortable leather chair of first class, with plenty of space to stretch her legs, and a flight attendant offering orange juice before the plane had even left the ground, she couldn't relax. Karen's distrustful look kept replaying in her head. Outside the window, the Atlanta sky was gray and threatening rain, which only added to the heaviness she felt in her chest. As the plane taxied down the runway, an elderly woman sitting in the seat next to her leaned slightly in Amara's direction. She had neatly styled gray hair, wore a light blue floral dress, and held a small hardcover book in her right hand. "Are you okay, dear?" the woman asked, her tone genuinely concerned. Amara blinked a few times, trying to snap out of her thoughts. "Oh, yeah, I'm fine. Thanks. You didn't look fine back there at the gate," the woman continued, ignoring Amara's clear attempt to shut the conversation down. "I saw what happened. These things are so unnecessary. Sometimes people just don't know how to treat others." Amara opened her mouth to respond, but stopped herself. She wasn't sure what to say. Part of her wanted to forget the whole incident, but another part of her wanted to vent. Ultimately, she decided this wasn't the time or the right person to open up to, so she just nodded and mumbled, "Yeah, it was kind of complicated." The woman gave a small smile as if she understood. "Well, if you need anything, I'm here, all right. My name's Dorothy, by the way." "Amara," she replied, forcing a polite smile. Dorothy seemed ready to continue the conversation, but she was interrupted as the plane began to accelerate down the runway. Amara leaned back in her seat and closed her eyes, trying to ignore the pressure in her ears as the plane lifted off the ground and climbed quickly into the sky. After a few minutes, when the plane leveled out, the cabin crew began the in-flight service. A flight attendant with a flawless smile and a neatly pressed uniform passed by with a cart, offering drinks and snacks. Amara politely declined, still not feeling hungry. Instead, she took out her phone and reread the message from her dad. The short, straightforward text still seemed to carry so much weight. "The team called me. Are you okay? We'll talk when you land. That shouldn't have happened." She read the words over and over again, trying to decipher her father's exact tone. He seemed more concerned than angry, but there was something about that last sentence, "that shouldn't have happened," that made her uneasy. Amara and Michael Williams didn't have the closest relationship. He was a very busy businessman, always traveling to important meetings and attending global conferences. To her, he was more of a distant figure she occasionally talked to through text messages or quick phone calls than an active presence in her life. Most of her childhood memories revolved around her mom, who had raised Amara almost entirely on her own in a modest house in the Chicago suburbs. Everything changed 2 years ago when Amara's mom passed away after a long battle with cancer. From that moment, Michael insisted Amara move in with him in Los Angeles, saying it was the only way to ensure she had everything she needed. But the truth was that even though they lived under the same roof, they remained distant. He worked so much that he was rarely home, and while Amara was grateful for the stability, she often felt like a stranger in her own life. Dorothy's voice brought her back to the present. "Are you visiting someone in Los Angeles, dear?" Amara hesitated for a moment before replying. "My dad lives there." "Oh, I see. Family is important," Dorothy said with a kind smile. "Does he work in Los Angeles?" "Yeah," Amara answered vaguely, hoping to end the conversation. But Dorothy seemed too curious to pick up on the hint that she didn't want to talk. "What does he do? Must be something special if he got you this seat." Dorothy chuckled lightly, trying to make the conversation more casual. Amara bit her lip, feeling uncomfortable. What did she really know about her dad's job? Not much. She knew he owned a big company, something to do with aviation, but she had never cared to ask for the details. For the most part, she was content living her life without thinking too much about it. Still, there was something about Dorothy's curiosity that unsettled her. Did she know more than she was letting on? "He works with airplanes," Amara said, deliberately vague. Dorothy raised an eyebrow but didn't press further as the flight attendant came back to collect cups and cans from the passengers' trays. Taking advantage of the pause, Amara pulled out her headphones from her backpack and put them on, pretending to listen to something on her phone. That was enough for Dorothy to take the hint and go back to her book. The rest of the flight passed without major incidents. Amara spent the time trying to distract herself with games on her phone. But with every passing minute, she felt her anxiety grow. She knew her dad would be waiting at the airport. She also knew in some way that what had happened at the boarding gate would reach him. He probably already knew she had flown in first class, but did he know exactly what had happened? Or would she have to explain it all over again? When the plane finally landed in Los Angeles, Amara felt a mix of relief and apprehension. She grabbed her backpack and followed the flow of passengers toward the exit. The airport was crowded as always, and the energy in Los Angeles was so different from Atlanta. There was something chaotic yet vibrant in the air. As soon as she walked past the baggage claim area, Amara spotted her dad. He stood near one of the columns, wearing a sharp black suit and speaking on the phone. Even from a distance, he looked imposing, with his perfect posture and serious expression. When he finally saw her, he ended the call quickly and walked toward her. "Amara," he said with a smile that seemed both relieved and concerned. "Are you okay? What happened at the gate?" Amara took a deep breath, trying to keep her composure. She knew she'd have to tell him everything, but the truth was, she didn't even know where to start. Michael placed a hand on Amara's shoulder, as if trying to reassure her, but she instinctively stepped back, creating some distance between them. The tension between them was almost tangible, and Michael noticed it immediately. His smile faded, replaced by a serious expression. "Amara, what happened?" he asked, his tone more firm this time, but still tinged with concern. She looked down at the floor for a few seconds, fighting the lump in her throat. She wanted to say everything, to even yell, but she knew it wasn't in her nature to lose control like that. So she took a deep breath and decided to start from the beginning. "It happened at boarding, Dad. The woman at the counter saw me in the first-class line and thought my ticket was fake. She told me I was supposed to be in economy," Amara explained, trying to keep her voice neutral, though the indignation seeped through. "She didn't believe I had a first-class seat." Michael's brow furrowed, his jaw tightening. He didn't say anything for a moment, which only made Amara feel more uncomfortable. She knew her father was a composed man who rarely raised his voice or lost his temper, but in that moment, there was something in his expression that made her realize he was holding himself back. "And what happened next?" he asked, his voice tense. "She called a supervisor who checked my ticket and confirmed it was real. After that, they let me board, but—" Amara hesitated, trying to find the right words. "But it was humiliating, Dad. Everyone was staring at me like I didn't belong there, like I was some kind of fraud." Michael exhaled deeply, rubbing his temples. For a moment he looked so human, so vulnerable, that Amara almost felt bad for bringing it up. But this wasn't something she could simply ignore, not this time. "That's unacceptable," he muttered almost to himself. Then he looked directly at Amara, his eyes locked on hers. "I'm sorry you had to go through that. I'll handle this, okay? I'll deal with those people. That should never have happened." "Handle it how?" Amara asked, crossing her arms. "Are you going to yell at the woman? Fire someone?" "That won't change anything, Dad. She looked at me like I was less, like I didn't deserve to be there. This isn't just about the ticket. Don't you get that?" Michael fell silent, processing her words. There was something about the way Amara spoke that completely disarmed him. He had always thought that despite the challenges, Amara was strong enough to handle anything. But now he saw that he might have underestimated how much these situations weighed on her. "I understand, Amara. I really do," he said finally. "But you don't have to carry this alone. I'll make sure something is done about it. And above all, I'll make sure this never happens to you again. That's my responsibility." Amara let out a bitter laugh. "Responsibility? Dad, you're barely around. I've been living with you for 2 years, but it feels like we're in completely different worlds. You think you can fix everything with a phone call? But that doesn't change how people see me. It doesn't change how they treat me." Her words hit Michael like a punch to the stomach. He knew there was truth in what she said, but hearing it so directly was painful. He wasn't the kind of man who dealt well with failure, especially when it came to his family. "I know I've made mistakes," he admitted, his voice softer. "I know I haven't been as present as I should be. But that doesn't mean I don't care, Amara. You're my daughter. And for anything you need, I'm here. Even if I don't show it the way I should." Amara didn't respond immediately. She looked away, as if trying to decide whether or not she believed his words. Deep down, she wanted to believe him, but it was hard. Michael always seemed so distant, so caught up in his work, that it was difficult to imagine he truly understood what she went through. Before she could say anything, Michael glanced at his watch and gently placed a hand on her back, signaling it was time to leave the airport. "Let's go home. You must be exhausted." Amara just nodded, following him toward the parking lot. As they walked, she couldn't shake the feeling that something about her father was changing. Maybe it was his tone, or maybe it was the way he seemed to actually listen to her for once. But even so, she couldn't ignore the skepticism that lingered. After all, he was Michael Williams, the man who always put work first. On the drive home, Michael was unusually quiet. He rarely drove himself, usually relying on a chauffeur, but today he insisted on being the one behind the wheel. Amara sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window as the lights of Los Angeles blurred past, though her thoughts were racing. She had never been to her father's office before and wasn't sure what to expect. The idea of stepping into his world, even for a day, made her uneasy but also slightly curious. After several minutes of silence, Michael finally spoke. "Amara, you know what I do for a living, don't you?" The question caught her off guard. She frowned, turning to look at him. "You work with airplanes, right? You own something? A company?" Michael let out a brief sigh. "Yes, but it's more than that. I'm the founder and CEO of Williams Aviation. My company is one of the largest airlines in the United States." Amara blinked, trying to process what he had just said. She had always known her dad had money, but she had never truly considered the scale of it. To her, he was just a busy man, constantly in meetings and traveling. She had never connected that to the idea that he might own something so massive. "You own the airline?" she asked, her voice filled with disbelief. Michael nodded, keeping his eyes on the road. "Yes. And honestly, I should have told you that sooner. I didn't want it to change the way you see me, but I realize now that was a mistake." Amara sat in silence for a few moments, trying to absorb this new piece of information. Suddenly, everything made more sense. The first-class ticket, the way he seemed so confident about handling the situation. But at the same time, it only made her more confused. "So why didn't you do anything when it happened at the gate?" she asked, her tone challenging. "If you're the owner, why did you let them treat me like that?" "I didn't know it was happening, Amara. I wasn't there to see it. But now that I do know, I promise I'll do something about it," Michael replied, his voice calm but firm. "And what are you going to do? Give someone a lecture? That won't change how people see me, Dad. You could have all the money in the world, but it doesn't protect me from racism." Her words hung heavy in the car, and Michael didn't respond immediately. He knew she was right. Money could buy privilege, comfort, and power, but it couldn't change deeply ingrained prejudices. And that realization frustrated him, because for the first time, he felt powerless. "You're right," he said finally, "but that doesn't mean I'm going to stand by and do nothing. You're my daughter, Amara, and I'm going to fight for you, whether as your father or as the owner of this company." Amara studied him for a moment, trying to find sincerity in his words. For now, she decided it was better to wait and see. After all, words were easy, actions not so much. When they finally arrived home, Michael said just one thing before stepping out of the car. "Tomorrow, I want to show you something in my office. I think it will help you understand what I mean." Amara followed him to the front door, unsure of what to expect. But for the first time in a long time, she felt that maybe, just maybe, her father was genuinely trying to make a difference. The next morning, Amara woke up to the bright sun streaming through her bedroom curtains. The room was spacious, far bigger than the one she used to share with her mom back in Chicago, but despite all the comfort, it always felt cold, impersonal, like it belonged to someone else. She rarely felt truly at home here, and that sense of detachment only grew stronger whenever she tried to understand her father's world. As she got dressed, Amara's mind lingered on the revelation from the day before. Her father wasn't just a wealthy, busy man. He was the owner of one of the largest airlines in the country. The scale of it all was still hard to grasp. But even harder to process was the new layer of questions it raised. If Michael owned the company, how could something as humiliating as what happened at the boarding gate occur? Did it mean he genuinely didn't know what went on in his business? Or worse, did he know but choose not to care? She headed downstairs to the kitchen and found Michael already dressed in a suit, as always, sipping coffee while typing on his laptop. He looked absorbed in his work, But when he noticed Amara walk in, he closed the computer and offered her a small smile. "Good morning," he said gently. "Did you sleep well?" "I did," Amara replied, grabbing an apple from the fruit bowl and sitting at the kitchen island. She eyed him curiously, still skeptical about what he had planned. "You said you wanted to show me something today." Michael nodded, finishing the rest of his coffee before standing up. "Yes. I want you to come with me to my office. I think it's time you see up close what I actually do. And I want you to understand what it means for you, too." Amara frowned, confused. "What does this have to do with me?" "You'll understand when we get there," he said, offering no further explanation. The headquarters of Williams Aviation was a striking glass building in the heart of Los Angeles, its reflective surface gleaming under the California sun. On the drive there, Amara stared out the window, watching the bustling streets pass by, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She had never been to her father's office before, and wasn't sure what to expect. The idea of stepping into his world, even for a day, made her uneasy, but it also piqued her curiosity. When they arrived, Michael handed the car keys to the valet and led Amara to the building's main entrance. The interior was as impressive as the exterior: marble floors, walls adorned with photos of airplanes, and a reception area that looked more like a five-star hotel than an office. Employees walked briskly past them, many nodding at Michael or offering nervous smiles. It was clear that he was more than just the boss. He was an authority figure, someone everyone noticed. Michael guided Amara to the elevator and pressed the button for the top floor. As the numbers on the panel lit up one by one, he glanced at her with an expression that was equal parts pride and nervousness. "I want you to see not just what we do here, but the impact we have, for better and for worse," he said, as the elevator continued to ascend. Amara didn't respond. She crossed her arms, unsure of what he meant, but willing to hear him out. When the elevator doors opened, they stepped into a massive office with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of Los Angeles. In the center of the room was a large conference table, and the walls were lined with shelves displaying airplane models and industry awards. Michael walked over to the table and motioned for Amara to sit in one of the sleek leather chairs. "This is my world," he said, spreading his hands as if presenting something monumental. "Everything you see here was built through years of hard work. I started this company from scratch, and today we transport millions of people every year." Amara looked around, feeling small in the grandiose space. "It's impressive," she admitted honestly, "but why are you showing me this now?" Michael sat across from her, leaning forward with his elbows on the table and his fingers interlocked. He let out a deep breath before speaking. "Because I think you deserve to know the truth about what happened yesterday, and how it reflects something bigger. It wasn't just a failure in customer service. It was a reflection of something deeply rooted in society. And as the owner of this company, I'm responsible." Amara leaned in slightly, surprised by his candor. "Are you saying what happened was your fault?" "I didn't know what was happening at that specific moment," Michael clarified. "But the culture of any company starts at the top. And if someone on my team thought it was acceptable to treat you that way, it means that somewhere along the line I failed as a leader." The admission caught him off guard, but he pressed on. "I want to show you what I'm doing to address it, and I want you to be part of it." Amara frowned, confused. "Be part of it? What do you mean?" Michael grabbed a tablet from the table and handed it to her. On the screen was a detailed document outlining diversity and inclusion initiatives at Williams Aviation. He began explaining the steps the company was taking: mandatory employee training, stricter anti-discrimination policies, and the creation of internal committees to address bias. "This is a start," he said. "But it's not enough. I want you to help me understand what else we need to do. I want you to tell me what we're missing, what we're not seeing. Because, Amara, I might own this company, but I'll never know what it's like to be on the other side the way you were yesterday." Amara sat in silence for a long moment, processing everything he had said. She had never imagined her father could be so honest about his shortcomings, let alone that he would ask for her input. It made her see him in a different light, though part of her still doubted whether he would follow through. "I don't know if I can help," she said finally. "I'm not an expert in this, Dad. I'm just me." "And that's exactly why I want to hear from you," Michael replied. "Because this isn't about experts. It's about real experiences. I know I have a lot to learn, and I want you to help me see what I don't." Amara studied him for a few moments, searching for sincerity in his words. There was something in his expression, in the way he spoke, that felt genuine. Perhaps for the first time she saw her father not as the distant, unreachable figure she was used to, but as someone who truly wanted to do better. "Okay," she said at last. "I'll try." Michael smiled, relief washing over his face. "That's all I'm asking." In the days that followed, Michael began taking concrete steps to fulfill his promises. He organized meetings with team leaders, strengthened anti-discrimination policies, and, most importantly, created spaces where employees and customers could share their experiences anonymously. He also made a greater effort to spend time with Amara, not just as a businessman, but as her father. And Amara, for her part, started to see that while they still had a long way to go, there might be hope for their relationship after all. For the first time, she felt like her voice was being heard, and that made all the difference.